From Gorgeous George, who once earned the equivalent of $1.8 million a year before dying penniless, to Scott Hall, a legend who later relied on donations just to afford surgery, to Virgil, whose family had to crowdfund his funeral. In this video, we're breaking down the shocking stories of WWE legends who died completely broke. Gorgeous George. Before there was Hulk Hogan, before there was Ric Flair, before there was any concept of what a wrestling superstar could be, there was Gorgeous George, the man who invented the template. Born George Raymond Wagner on March 24, 1915, in Butte, Nebraska, he grew up during the Great Depression in circumstances that could only be described as poverty. His father was a house painter with inconsistent work, and young George dropped out of high school at just 14 years old to take odd jobs on farms and in factories. Wrestling became his escape, and by the early 1940s, he had transformed himself into something the sport had never seen. With platinum blonde dyed hair held in place by golden Georgie pins, sequined robes, and a valet named Jeffries who would spray the ring with perfumed disinfectant before each match, Gorgeous George wasn't just a wrestler, he was a phenomenon. His entrance to pomp and circumstance, his effeminate mannerisms, and his catchphrase, "Get your filthy hands off me," made him wrestling's first true heel, and audiences couldn't get enough. Even Muhammad Ali couldn't get enough.
I saw a wrestler once named Gorgeous George, and the place was jam-packed with people. Cars was lined up for miles. They hated Gorgeous George. They wanted him to beat, but they paid $100 for a ringside seat. So Gorgeous George walked out with his pretty silver hair, and he was walking so proud.
At his peak in the early 1950s, Gorgeous George was earning up to $160,000 annually, equivalent to approximately $1.8 million in today's money. He was, quite simply, the highest-paid athlete in the world. His career earnings approached nearly $2 million, and his influence extended far beyond wrestling. Muhammad Ali credited George for teaching him the art of trash talk. James Brown borrowed his flair. Bob Dylan studied his persona. But fortune, as it so often does, proved fleeting. George's downfall came through a combination of multiple divorces, severe alcoholism, gambling, and catastrophically bad investments. The most notorious of these was a $250,000 turkey ranch in Beaumont, California, an enormous sum at the time, that failed spectacularly. A restaurant he opened in Van Nuys barely covered his mounting debts when he was forced to sell it in 1962. By the time liver cirrhosis forced his retirement in 1962, the man who had once been wrestling's greatest attraction was flat broke. On Christmas 1963, he couldn't afford to buy his son Gary a skateboard, so he handmade one himself. 2 days later, on December 26, 1963, Gorgeous George suffered a fatal heart attack. He was just 48 years old, and his estate was so modest that fellow wrestlers and promoters had to fund his funeral. Up next is Raymond Kessler, known to wrestling fans as the Haiti Kid, represents one of the most heartbreaking examples of how the industry discarded its performers once their usefulness ended. The Haiti Kid. Born in 1954 in Brooklyn, New York, Kessler had dwarfism and found his way into professional wrestling's midget division, a popular attraction in the WWF during the 1970s and 1980s that, while entertaining to audiences, often treated its performers as novelties rather than legitimate athletes. Throughout his career, the Haiti Kid competed alongside legends, appearing at WrestleMania 2 in 1986 as part of Mr. T's Corner during his boxing match against Roddy Piper, and wrestling in the mixed tag team match at WrestleMania 3 in 1987. He also had acting credits, appearing in films like Penitentiary 3 in 1987. For 2 decades, he was a fixture of the undercard, entertaining crowds who came to see the main event, but stayed for his high-energy performances. But when his usefulness to the company ended, so did any semblance of support. The wrestling industry of that era offered no health insurance, no retirement plans, and no pension for performers like Kessler. Midget wrestlers in particular earned significantly less than main roster stars, while facing the same physical risks. By February 2009, Raymond Kessler was living in a homeless shelter in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. The man who had performed before tens of thousands at WrestleMania was now relying on public assistance to survive. When WWE interviewed him that same year for their Legends of WrestleMania video game, it served as a stark reminder that he was still alive, contrary to erroneous death reports that had circulated since 2001. As of the most recent verifiable information, Kessler's current status remains unclear, and his story stands as a damning indictment of an industry that failed to protect its most vulnerable performers. The Dynamite Kid. Tom Billington was one of the most innovative wrestlers of his generation, a man whose high-flying, technically precise style influenced everyone from Chris Benoit to Rey Mysterio. Born on December 5, 1958 in Goulburn, Lancashire, England, he came from a working-class family with a strong combat sports background. His father and uncle were boxers, his grandfather a bare-knuckle fighter. Wrestling scene as part of the British Bulldogs alongside his cousin Davey Boy Smith. The Dynamite Kid captured the WWF World Tag Team Championship at WrestleMania 2 in 1986. His 1982 match against Tiger Mask in New Japan Pro Wrestling won the Wrestling Observer Newsletter's Match of the Year award and is still considered one of the greatest matches ever contested. He was, by any measure, a revolutionary, but that revolution came at a terrible cost. The high-impact style that made him famous also destroyed his body. Years of steroid abuse, cocaine use, and punishing in-ring work caught up with him. A severe back injury left him requiring surgery, and by 1997, complications from his accumulated injuries left him paraplegic, wheelchair-bound, and paralyzed from the waist down. The financial toll was equally devastating. Without guaranteed contracts, Billington's earnings from WWF and his Japanese tours, where he once made $20,000 per tour, were depleted on healthcare costs. His family was forced to launch a GoFundMe campaign in 2016 to help cover his medical bills. He spent his final years living in council housing, public housing, in Ince, Wigan, England, reliant on government assistance. On December 5, 2018, his 60th birthday, Tom Billington died from complications of his long-term health issues, including injuries, heart problems, and a 2013 stroke. The man who had revolutionized professional wrestling passed away with nothing. A cautionary tale of what happens when an industry takes everything from its performers and gives nothing back. Jimmy Superfly Snooka. Few images in wrestling history are as iconic as Jimmy Superfly Snooka perched atop a steel cage, preparing to launch himself onto a prone opponent below. Born James Wiley Smith Ryer on May 18, 1943, in Suva, Fiji, Snooka's aerial maneuvers, particularly his Superfly splash, influenced generations of wrestlers who followed. He was a legitimate WWF legend, inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1996, and is credited with popularizing high-flying wrestling in America. But Snooka's legacy is forever tainted by tragedy, specifically the 1983 death of his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, under circumstances that remained suspicious for decades.
Snooka was married with 4 children at the time of his girlfriend's death and had a history of drinking, drug use, and womanizing. He had a previous arrest for dragging Argentino down a hotel hallway.
In 1985, her family won a $500,000 default judgment against him in a wrongful death lawsuit. Snooka's response? He claimed poverty to avoid paying and reportedly filed for bankruptcy, never paying a dime of that judgment. The legal troubles never stopped haunting him. In September 2015, Snooka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter in connection with Argentino's death, more than 30 years after the fact. By this point, his financial situation had deteriorated to the point where his attorneys withdrew from the case due to unpaid legal fees. Reports indicated his debts had reached approximately $1 million. Diagnosed with stomach cancer in August 2015 and suffering from dementia likely caused by years of head trauma, Snooka was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. The murder charges were dropped in January 2017, just days before he died on January 15, 2017, at age 73. He passed amid terminal illness, mounting legal fees, unpaid medical bills, and a cloud of controversy that will forever shadow his athletic achievements. Up next is Rico Constantino, who went from being a flamboyant WWE superstar to a man who was fighting for his life while strangers donated what they could to keep him alive. Rico Constantino. Before Rico Constantino became the flamboyant, perfectly coiffed, stylist character that WWE audiences knew simply as Rico, he was something entirely different, a legitimate tough guy with a background that most wrestlers could only pretend to have. Born Americo Sebastiano on October 1, 1961 in Las Vegas, Nevada, he competed on American Gladiators before finding his way into professional wrestling through Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's developmental territory. His WWE career, which ran from approximately 2001 to 2004, saw him portray a character that was deliberately over the top, a meticulous stylist who fussed over his appearance and later became an on-screen manager involved in various mid-card storylines. It was a far cry from his actual background, but Rico committed to the character with professionalism, understanding that entertainment was the name of the game. After leaving WWE in the mid-2000s, Rico did what many wrestlers struggle to do. He attempted to build a normal life outside the ring. He returned to law enforcement and security work, trying to establish himself in a career that didn't require destroying his body for applause. For a time, it seemed like he might be one of the lucky ones, a wrestler who got out before the business took everything from him. But the wrestling life has a way of catching up with performers, even after they've left the ring. Rico's health began to deteriorate dramatically. By March 2020, reports emerged that he was fighting for his life and suffering from multiple life-threatening conditions. The specifics were harrowing: heart problems, brain issues, and blood clots that required extensive hospitalization. The medical bills mounted relentlessly. Without the income from his wrestling days and facing expenses that would challenge anyone's finances, Rico's situation became desperate. GoFundMe campaigns were launched to help cover his medical costs, with the wrestling community rallying to support a man who had entertained them for years. The fundraising efforts documented a stark reality: a former WWE performer reduced to relying on the charity of fans and fellow wrestlers just to pay for the medical care he needed to survive. Reddit discussions and wrestling forums chronicled his declining health, with fans expressing concern and frustration that another performer had fallen through the cracks of an industry that generated billions in revenue, yet often left its former stars to fend for themselves. The man who had once strutted confidently to the ring, every hair perfectly in place, was now fighting for his life, while strangers donated what they could to keep him alive. Up next is Davey Boy Smith, aka the British Bulldog, who went from top dog in the WWE to being financially strained with no incoming money and borrowing from family members just to survive. British Bulldog. Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, was a powerhouse whose strength became the stuff of wrestling legend. Born November 27, 1962, in Goulburn, Lancashire, England, he was known for performing delayed vertical suplexes on giants like Andre the Giant, holding opponents aloft for what seemed like impossible lengths of time. His victory over Bret Hart for the Intercontinental Championship at SummerSlam 1992, before 92,000 fans at Wembley Stadium, remains one of the most celebrated moments in WWE history. But behind the Union Jack gear and the roaring crowds, Smith was battling demons that would ultimately destroy him. A severe back injury sustained in WCW in 1998 caused a spinal infection and led to an opiate addiction that saw him consuming 15 to 20 pills daily. When WCW fired him via FedEx while he was still bedridden from the injury, withholding his pay, his financial situation began its terminal decline. The costs mounted relentlessly. Legal fees from a $1.3 million civil suit stemming from a bar fight in 2000 exceeded $500,000. His divorce from Diana Hart added alimony burdens. Multiple rehabilitation stints drained what remained of his savings. He had earlier paid $100,000 to exit his WWF contract to join WCW, a decision that proved catastrophic when that relationship soured. By 2002, Davey Boy Smith was financially strained with no incoming money, borrowing from family members just to survive. He was planning a low-level comeback on the independent circuit with his son Harry as the new British Bulldogs, desperately seeking any income stream he could find. On May 18, 2002, while vacationing in Invermere, British Columbia, Smith suffered a fatal heart attack. He was just 39 years old. The autopsy revealed an enlarged heart, possibly from years of steroid use, along with painkillers and steroids in his system. He died with virtually no assets, having given everything to an industry that discarded him when he was no longer useful. Up next is Crash Holly, who went from being one of the greatest hardcore wrestlers of all time to losing everything to his addiction, divorce, and financial crisis. Crash Holly. Michael John Lockwood was never going to be a main eventer. He knew that, and he made peace with it. But what Crash Holly lacked in size, he more than made up for in creativity and heart. Standing just 5 feet 11 inches and weighing 212 pounds, he debuted in WWF in 1999 with a brilliantly absurd gimmick. He would carry a scale to the ring and demand to be announced as weighing over 400 pounds, daring anyone to challenge him. His greatest legacy came through the 24/7 rule of the WWF Hardcore Championship, which allowed the title to be defended anywhere at any time. Crash became the Houdini of hardcore, winning the championship an astonishing 22 times, defending it in airports, hotels, and even amusement parks. He was a mid-card staple of the Attitude Era, and fans genuinely loved him. But when WWE released him on June 30th, 2003, amid roster restructuring following the WCW acquisition, everything began to fall apart. His addiction issues worsened, leading to felony drug possession charges. His marriage to Christina Wheeler deteriorated, and she filed for divorce. A wrestling school he had opened in Salisbury, North Carolina, failed to provide the financial stability he desperately needed. Sporadic independent bookings and a brief stint in TNA couldn't come close to matching his former WWF salary. In his final months, Lockwood was living with friend Stevie Richards, having lost the stability of a permanent home. Divorce papers arrived shortly before his death, adding emotional devastation to his financial distress. On November 6, 2003, Crash Holly was found dead at Richards' home in Navarre, Florida. He was just 32 years old. The autopsy ruled his death a suicide by overdose of carisoprodol and alcohol, causing him to asphyxiate on his own vomit. He left behind a 7-year-old daughter in a wrestling world that mourned a performer who had deserved so much better. In an industry dominated by men, Luna Vachon carved out a space that was entirely her own, but her downfall was a similar story to her male counterparts. Luna Vachon. Born Gertrude Elizabeth Wilkerson on January 12, 1962, she came from wrestling royalty. Her father was Butcher Paul Vachon, and her aunt was the legendary Mad Dog Vachon. But Luna wasn't content to coast on family connections. She built something singular, a 22-year career that spanned WWF, ECW, WCW, and countless independent promotions. Her appearance alone was unforgettable. With a shaved mohawk, dramatic face paint, and a gothic aesthetic that predated the extreme era by years, Luna Vachon looked like she had crawled out of a nightmare, and that was precisely the point. She wasn't trying to be pretty. She was trying to be terrifying, and she succeeded brilliantly. In an era when women wrestlers were often reduced to eye candy, Luna demanded to be taken seriously as a performer, and audiences had no choice but to comply. But behind the war paint and the snarling promos, Luna was fighting battles that no crowd ever saw. She struggled with bipolar disorder, a condition that made the already chaotic wrestling lifestyle even more difficult to navigate. The physical toll of 2 decades in the ring led to chronic pain, which in turn led to a dependence on prescription painkillers. She entered and exited various promotions, her releases often tied to the instability that plagued her personal life. Then, around Christmas 2009, disaster struck. A house fire destroyed Luna's home, taking with it not just her possessions, but her entire collection of wrestling memorabilia, the physical evidence of a career she had sacrificed her body to build. Fellow wrestler Mick Foley organized fundraising efforts to help her recover, but the damage extended far beyond what any GoFundMe could repair. Luna was forced to move in with her mother, having lost everything she owned. She had completed a WWE-funded rehabilitation program in June 2009, an attempt to address her prescription medication dependency. But addiction is a relentless opponent, one that doesn't stay down for a 3 count. On August 27, 2010, Luna Vachon was found dead in her Florida home. She was just 48 years old. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose of oxycodone and benzodiazepines. Investigators at the scene found crushed pill residue, snorting straws, and multiple unsecured prescription bottles, evidence of a woman who had lost her battle with the demons that had pursued her for years. She died in the aftermath of losing her home, living with her mother, her career behind her and her health in ruins. Luna Vachon had given everything to wrestling, and in the end, wrestling gave her very little back. Brian Pillman was wrestling's loose cannon, a man so committed to blurring the lines between reality and fiction that no one, including his employers, could ever be quite sure what he would do next. Brian Pillman. Born May 22, 1962 in Cincinnati, Ohio, he overcame a childhood marked by 31 to 40 throat surgeries for polyps that left him with a distinctive raspy voice and a determination that bordered on obsessive. Before wrestling, Pillman was a legitimate football star, earning second-team All-American honors and MAC Defensive Player of the Year at Miami University. He played preseason for the Buffalo Bills before an injury ended his football dreams. Wrestling became his new obsession, and he excelled at it, winning championships and Stampede Wrestling, WCW, and eventually signing with WWF. His loose cannon persona was revolutionary. He worked shoots, performances designed to look unscripted, that fooled everyone, including insulting WCW booker Kevin Sullivan on live television and creating chaos at ECW events. The character was so convincing that it helped him negotiate WWF's first ever guaranteed contract, worth over $200,000. A groundbreaking deal at the time. But a devastating Humvee accident on April 15, 1996, shattered his ankle and caused facial fractures. The injury fostered an addiction to painkillers, and though he returned to wrestling, he was never the same. He downplayed his injuries to employers, desperate to keep working and earning money for his growing family of 5 children. On October 5, 1997, Brian Pillman was found dead in a Bloomington, Minnesota hotel room, just hours before he was scheduled to wrestle at WWF's Bad Blood pay-per-view. The autopsy revealed a heart attack caused by undetected atherosclerotic heart disease, the same condition that had killed his father. He was 35 years old. Though Pillman had worked to secure financial stability through his guaranteed contract, his family faced hardship after his death, with memorial funds reportedly mismanaged. His son, Brian Pillman Jr., now wrestles in WWE as Lexus King, carrying on a legacy that deserved a far less tragic ending. Up next is Kamala, who once headlined against Hulk Hogan and Undertaker, and tragically had a downfall so bad, his family had to launch another GoFundMe to cover funeral expenses, raising $32,664 with contributions from wrestlers like Chris Jericho. Kamala. James Arthur Harris was born into poverty in Senatobia, Mississippi, on May 28, 1950, and poverty would bookend his life. His father was murdered during a dice game when James was just 4 years old, and the family survived as sharecroppers on a cotton plantation, receiving minimal pay after landowner deductions. He dropped out of high school in 9th grade and turned to burglary, before police suggested he leave town to avoid vigilante justice. Wrestling saved him, or so it seemed. In 1982, Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett created the Kamala character, a savage Ugandan headhunter who entered arenas with a spear, shield, loincloth, war paint, and African mask. Despite being American, Harris committed fully to the gimmick, and it made him a star. He headlined against Hulk Hogan, feuded with The Undertaker at Survivor Series 1992, and won the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship 4 times. But the money never matched the fame. Harris later revealed the staggering pay disparity he faced. For his Survivor Series 1992 match against The Undertaker, he earned $10,000, while The Undertaker reportedly earned $500,000. He slept in his car to save money and received no royalties from merchandise bearing his likeness. As a black wrestler in an era rife with racial inequities, Harris was consistently underpaid compared to his white counterparts. Diabetes, diagnosed in 1992, began destroying his body. By 2011, he had lost his left leg to amputation. His right leg followed in 2012, requiring dialysis 3 times weekly. He relied on disability payments and selling handmade wooden chairs to survive. A 1993 GoFundMe campaign was necessary to prevent him from losing his home to unpaid taxes. On August 9, 2020, James Harris died from cardiac arrest amid COVID-19 complications, with diabetes and obesity as contributing factors. He was 70 years old. Up next is Scott Hall, who was one of the coolest performers in wrestling history, a man whose charisma could fill arenas and whose demons could empty his bank accounts just as quickly. Scott Hall. Born October 20th, 1958, in St. Mary's County, Maryland, he grew up as a military brat, moving constantly before a traumatic event at age 24 changed everything. In January 1983, while working as a bouncer at an Orlando strip club, Hall wrestled a gun from a man and fatally shot him in self-defense. Though charges were dropped, the incident left him with PTSD that would fuel decades of substance abuse. His wrestling career was spectacular. As Razor Ramon in WWF, he embodied a slick, arrogant Miami Cuban who delivered iconic promos and pioneered the ladder match in his legendary feud with Shawn Michaels. His 1996 invasion of WCW Monday Nitro launched the Monday Night Wars and the formation of the New World Order, NWO, fundamentally changing professional wrestling. But the addictions proved relentless. Hall went to rehab more than 15 times, was fired from both WCW and WWE for substance-related issues, and accumulated a arrests, including DUIs and domestic violence charges. 2 divorces added alimony and child support obligations. His high earnings from wrestling's boom period were squandered on his lifestyle and addictions. By 2011, he was living in a rundown home, prompting his friend Diamond Dallas Page to intervene with his DDP yoga program. A 2013 GoFundMe campaign raised $110,000 for hip surgery and dental work because Hall was broke, with no savings left. Though he recovered enough to attend his WWE Hall of Fame inductions in 2014 and 2020, his health remained fragile. In early March 2022, Hall fell and broke his hip. During surgery, a blood clot dislodged, causing 3 heart attacks on March 12, 2022. He was taken off life support 2 days later, per his wishes. Scott Hall was 63 years old. Our next entry, Virgil went from being a beloved wrestling mainstay to sitting alone at convention tables, hoping fans would pay for signatures. Virgil. Michael Jones, known to wrestling fans as Virgil, became famous for a role that required him to be humiliated. As the silent, money-carrying bodyguard for Ted DiBiase's $1 Million Man, he spent years being ordered around, taking beatings on his boss's behalf, and generally serving as wrestling's most loyal lackey. His 1991 babyface turn, when he finally stood up to DiBiase and won the $1 Million Championship, remains one of the era's most satisfying moments. But life after wrestling proved brutally difficult. Virgil became a fixture at autograph conventions, where he was often photographed sitting alone at tables, hoping fans would pay for signatures. The image became an internet meme, but behind the jokes was a man struggling to survive. On April 15, 2022, Jones publicly revealed he had suffered 2 strokes and been diagnosed with dementia. A month later, he announced he also had stage 2 colon cancer. His health was failing, and his finances were failing faster. By December 2023, an emergency crowdfunding campaign was launched with a goal of just $400 to help him buy clothing, toiletries, and basic necessities for the winter. The modest goal alone spoke volumes about how dire his circumstances had become. On February 23, 2024, Virgil suffered 2 additional strokes. 5 days later, on February 28, 2024, he died at a hospital in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. He was 72 years old. Because he had no life insurance, a friend launched a GoFundMe to cover his funeral expenses, seeking $20,000 from a wrestling community that mourned a performer who had spent his final years begging for basic survival. Up next is Roddy Piper, who was one of the greatest talkers in wrestling history, a man who could provoke riots with nothing but a microphone and a sneer. But tragically, his relationship with money was more complicated. Roddy Piper. Roderick George Toombs was one of the greatest talkers in wrestling history, a man who could provoke riots with nothing but a microphone and a sneer. As Roddy Piper, he headlined the first WrestleMania in 1985, created the revolutionary interview segment Piper's Pit, and made himself one of the most hated and beloved performers of his generation. But Piper's relationship with money was complicated. Despite his fame, he was acutely aware of the industry's failures to protect its performers. In a haunting quote, he discussed how WWE wouldn't allow wrestlers to access their pension until age 65, and predicted accurately that he wouldn't live that long. This forced him to return to wrestling at age 49 simply because he needed the money, despite the toll it took on his already damaged body. Throughout his career, Piper battled substance abuse, endured countless injuries, and in 2006 was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer he ultimately beat. But the years of punishment had taken their toll. On July 31st, 2015, Roddy Piper died in his sleep at his Hollywood home. He was 61 years old. The cause was cardiac arrest brought on by hypertension, with a pulmonary embolism as a contributing factor. While some estimates placed his net worth at $4 million at the time of death, his own words painted a picture of a man who understood all too well how the wrestling business chewed up its performers and spat them out. Piper's story may not be one of absolute destitution, but his public statements about financial stress, forced comebacks, and the industry's pension failures make him a crucial voice in understanding why so many of his peers did die broke. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.